So my name's Joseph Delong, Joe Delong, and I am founder of a platform called Astaria. And Astaria is a super capital efficient lending platform. We've just gotten started. So I was formerly CTO of Sushi up until December, and we are today I want to discuss about why there should be hierarchy in DAOs and kind of like this idea that structurelessness isn't really a viable methodology. Here we go. All right, and I am keenly aware this is deeply unpopular, the idea of having a hierarchy in DAOs. I think that most people who have been in the corporate world have kind of experienced what they consider middle management and have had a pretty bad experience. But then the opposite side of that is kind of this total flat organization results in lack of productivity overall for the organization. And so I also want to talk about the exception cases here. The ones that I'm talking about really are highly performant DAOs that are building products that are shipping. I'm not talking about Flamingo or People Pleaser who are more like investment clubs. Ones that are really in a hyper competitive landscape, building products and shipping them, like MakerDAO, Aave, Sushi, Uni, etc. And the other exception to this is teams that are early stage, that are about 5 to 6, right? It tends to be at that stage, you're able to have a completely flat organization where decisions are made by the participants. But as you kind of scale the organization, you start to hit barriers to scaling, just mostly around the idea that you can't round trip communicate with that many people, right? Scales at factorial for communication to message to everyone and get their input on an independent decision. Cool. Yeah. So these flat organizations, I think I kind of blame our early contemporaries in Ethereum. They had this idea of decentralization where decentralization for protocols is really good from a game theory perspective. And they wanted to kind of communicate those same principles into organizations, that these flat organizations are decentralized. They're kind of leaderless. I have a feeling so far from the major organizations that were early, they've all kind of pivoted into a more structured hierarchy. And that's the nature of flat organizations, is that they eventually go there. And so there are two key I'd say reason categories for why flat organizations can't work. And the first one is psychological. Those are ideas how to lead an organization. You can't really lead by committee. Things like architecture, you can't really do architecture by committee either. And the second are practical reasons, like maybe legal or financial liability, those sorts of things. Cool. And so I think that what you'll find in the history of human organization is that there have always been hierarchies. In places where they say that there is no hierarchy, hierarchy tends to form. And it really is about how transparent that hierarchy is versus how opaque that hierarchy is. And that's something that's covered in this great article from a 1960s member of the women's liberation movement named Jo Freeman. And she wrote a essay called "The Tyranny of Structurelessness." And she's got some thoughts on structurelessness. that I think are, oh wait, no, that's not her. That's her, okay? I think that's probably more me at the top. Structurelessness is basically bullshit. This whole idea of having a structureless organization tends to just form an opaque structure inside of the organization because people are naturally organized that way. Access to resources, social hierarchy, those things form naturally. And wouldn't it be better if those hierarchies were transparent and not opaque? So this is one that I would say is like a hybrid of psychological and practical decision making. It's really difficult to make decisions as a group, especially once you scale past 5 or 6. And that's really has to do with communication, your capability to stop and halt all operations to make a decision and have kind of like all the voices heard of participants. This is where you see like organizations break down. You need to move fast. You can't really do that when you're kind of having to stop and make considerations for everybody's voice to be heard. Another one is hiring, firing, evaluations, access to resources. These sorts of things that are in that like decision-making realm are important things that need to be done correctly. And being done as a group doesn't necessarily mean that you'll arrive at the correct decision. I see it all the time. People are like, so-and-so's a great dev. You go and check their GitHub. Never made a commit ever in their life. And so it's just like kind of becomes a popularity contest, and the individual contributors are not graded based on their merit of their contribution, but basically on their popularity. And this becomes a problem when you're making decisions. The other thing I would say is like setting like a roadmap, right? You need some sort of leadership to help set a roadmap, guide, vision, and direction. Ultimately, there's going to be some authority that has to be the final say in a decision when there's a disagreement. Yes. So this was me before. I have since definitely changed my mind about this. I think like working out in the open like this is really interesting and fun. And it works early on and then fails to scale later on. You can definitely build an org this way, but you are going to have problems down the road. Necessary secrecy. I would say that this is a practical reason. If I'm a DAO and I'm building, like, let's say a really, if I'm a DAO and I'm building a really high-end product, I want to have some competitive intelligence. I want to not share with my competitors necessarily what we're building, or and that requires we can't necessarily share every single bit of information with every person in the organization. I touched on hiring and firing and performance earlier, but like salary negotiations, how are you performing? These are things that are embarrassing for people. Those are not things that we want to be shared out in the open publicly. And it's perfectly capable, or we're perfectly capable of designating an individual to evaluate and keep that as a private conversation. Another one might be secrecy is legal reason, or necessary secrecy is legal reasons. Maybe you are served with a subpoena and it's sealed. You can't share that with anybody. I think that this is a rosy idea that we have about DAOs, is that just because we've created a new organizational tool, that we don't suffer from any of the old world problems. Ownership. How does a DAO own anything? I mean, I can think of a few examples of DAOs owning things, but they're not owned by a DAO. I think that we'll get there. The laws in Wyoming, et cetera, are improving for DAOs, but A DAO is not a legal entity in most places, and DAOs can't own things. So if, let's say that they own a domain name for their application, who owns that? Okay, so now you have some legal entity, and some people are owners of that legal entity, and some people aren't. This becomes problematic, and is required for there to be some sort of leadership to be the holders of that. I can think of like numerous things: domains, discords, hosting, you name it, and all of that will get held hostage by bad actors who are in the DAO if there is not some sort of like hierarchical structure and a transition plan. Liability. This is another practical reason. Without a legal entity, individual contributors are liable for the actions of the DAO and the things that they're building. And that's going to keep you from getting the best contributors. And if we're working in a super competitive space where we're all fighting for some of the best developers aren't going to come. I experienced this a few times trying to hire developers, and they're not being kind of like an org to put them under, right? They're worried about their personal liability for their actions within the DAO. So, and this is my proposal for a way forward, is to allow or to treat DAOs as a organizational structure, but people participate in DAOs, people aren't DAOs. The DAO is the architecture in which we cooperate with one another. And inside that architecture, we should make room for legal entities with their own hierarchy. And this will allow us to develop excellent products that are able to compete in this very hyper-competitive space. That's all I have. Is there any questions? Yeah, go for it.
I got what you meant about why a committee can't do leadership, but could you say more about why a committee can't do architecture?
Totally. So this is like, in engineering, we talk about this a lot, as they call it design by committee. And kind of when you are having a group of individuals, designing and engineering are a series of trade-offs. And so you can never optimize on all individual axes, but you'll have different stakeholders on the committee who will be trying to optimize on their preferred axes. I think there are some instances when you can get like a good version of this, but generally this is like why Fortune 500 software is like pretty bad, is because they kind of like participate in this design by committee. Most like agile processes name a product owner, and that product owner is the person who's making determinations on what parts of the product need to be built. Anyone else? Cool. 5 minutes? Okay. We got lots of time. Yeah, I can wrap now. Yeah. So, yeah. So, no, this is just kind of my thought is that we use legal entities as kind of a wrapper, and each of those legal entities interacts inside of the DAO. And we use, I know token voting is just not a great design so far, but it's all we have right now. And each of those entities, maybe they have some token allocation, or maybe they are, like respected by the collective DAO to give their input. And each of those are just like participants, and we work kind of like inside the DAO, right? It's okay to have a hierarchy because it will allow us to ship products faster and like more competitive products. Does that cover that? Cool. Yeah, that's a great question. Are there any DAOs that I think are doing a great job of this today? And actually, I have totally gone 180 on this, just based on my experiences. I think Uniswap Labs is doing a great job. I think the way that they structure themselves and set up to build kind of like products as a labs model, and then kind of like deploy and have a community who's managing that deployment. Uniswap Labs is they're not beholden to the token holders, right? The token holders are doing DAO governance that's kind of overarching the Uniswap protocol. And they are just product developers. They're developing new products and asking the DAO if they can launch them and accept them. The other one, I would say Maker before they dissolved their organization. I think Maker was doing a great job. Go. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I actually meant to touch on it, but I just didn't read my notes. This idea of if you have to have a legal entity, that requires disclosure of who the individuals are participating in that legal entity. So I actually think anonymity is a knock-on effect of not having a legal entity, right? So participants go, okay, I don't want to assume liability for this. I'm going to participate under an anonymous account or a pseudo-anonymous account. And this fails in so many ways because being anonymous is very difficult to do in public. Anything that you say, the way that you spell gray or what time you start tweeting in the middle of the day, right, tells us a little bit about who you are, right? And we can kind of narrow and narrow and narrow until, Zach XBT is doxing you. I think that's kind of the reasoning. Okay, cool. I gotta wrap it up. But yeah, that's my thought. I think anons are doing it because they don't have some sort of legal protection. Cool. Thank you.